Hello, everybody. My name is Christine Curry, and I'm the Iowa Outreach Coordinator of the Upper Mississippi River Initiative, known as UMRI. And welcome to our June 2021 series on soil and water conservation, Thinking Like a Watershed program. The monthly presentations take place the first Tuesday of every month at 7 o'clock. They are jointly hosted with our Isaac Walton League colleagues of the Upper Mississippi River Initiative, and our agriculture outreach coordinator, Tim Wagner, who just retired, and Save Our Streams coordinator, Zach Moss. And the co-hosts include Chris Henning, who is not on with us, but she might be popping in. She's one of our Panora Conservation chapter members. Thank you all for joining us this evening for another extraordinary presentation, Heartland Heroines, with Minnesota's Robin Moore and Iowa's Denise O'Brien. This evening, we will learn how two savvy conservationists empower working farm landowners to put their inner land ethic to work, including women as keepers of most of the millions of rented farmland acres. Robin has made several conservation contributions, including one of the organizers of the Land Stewardship Project based in Western Minnesota. And Denise is one of the founding mothers of the Women, Food, and Agriculture Network. She continues her contributions with her family's organic farm at Rolling Acres Farm in Atlantic, Iowa. So welcome, everybody. And this evening, we will get started with Robin from Minnesota, who is going to attempt to share a PowerPoint with us this evening, and with limited bandwidth from the rural part of Minnesota. So welcome, Robin. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so rural internet permitting, I'm going to share this. It means I won't be able to see you, so I don't know if I'm doing anything really weird with my face, shout at me. And I just want to apologize from the beginning that I'm going to go 100 miles an hour. And you can blame that directly on Caroline Banchek by asking me to address too much. So here we go. We'll see how it works.
And again, if you have questions, just put them in the chat box, and Caroline is going to attempt to manage those, and we will have a time for a question and answer. Thank you so much.
Okie doke. So as Christine said, I work with the Land Stewardship Project. It's a Minnesota-based membership-led organization. And our mission is to foster an ethic of stewardship for farmland, to promote sustainable agriculture, and to develop healthy communities. And so this includes landscape change, working with farmers, policy work, working on policy that supports communities in sustainable farming, training new farmers, continuing education, networking for farmers, community food systems work. We also work with farm transitions, and my work focuses on non-operating landowners, or people who own farmland and rent it out, don't work it themselves. So why are we working with non-operating landowners? Bear with me while I switch slides in two places. My work in Land Stewardship Project started out as a watershed project that was focused on landscape change to support water quality in a watershed. And our watershed was approximately 1.4 million acres. It's a Chippewa River watershed, and it is 75% agricultural use. And as we're focusing on farmers, on changing their practices to manage grazing, to grazing cropland, to including cover crops, to reduced tillage, what we heard over and over again is that farmers were perfectly willing to do it on their own land, but they wouldn't do it on their rented land. And this was because of one-year leases. What's the purpose of investing in soil building if you're not sure you're going to have it. Also, soil building practices tend to not to start to pay off until 3 or 4 years down the road. So once again, with a 1-year lease, what's the incentive? There was risk and investment that they were unwilling to put into on rented land unless somebody was sharing that risk and investment. And then the final part was just not having a very functional relationship with that landowner, where they didn't feel like they could approach a landowner about doing something different, or were worried that the landowner would think it was weird or messy. So we heard this right away, and this is a big deal because approximately 50% of land farmed in the upper Midwest is rented land. That's a huge amount, and this is a group of people that generally aren't being addressed. They aren't being addressed in solutions. We generally focus on farmers. They don't always self-identify. A coworker of mine, after 2 years, looked at me and said, "I'm a non-operating landowner." And it's not something that people are encouraged to think about themselves as, but they're a group with a lot of power over a lot of the landscape and have the power to support, encourage, demand these kinds of changes on the landscape, because they generally have very strong conservation values. And in my line of work, any farmer that has been willing to sit down and have a conversation with me, every single one of them has said, "I want to leave the land better than I found it." And that is also what most landowners say. They just don't recognize that they both want the same things and they aren't working together to achieve it, because the farmer landowner interaction has really been reduced to a financial transaction, and that's the norm. And it's what people are encouraged to think of it as. And it's really intimidating to change that in the face of the general social norms. And finally, a lot of landowners don't have the confidence to make the asks of the farmers because they don't feel like they know what they're talking about. They don't know how to phrase it, or how to ask, or what to ask. Another thing I wanted to point out, this is my notes from the same place, is this is, once again, this is a group that has been left out of the conversation. They often aren't invited to field days or educational events. They often aren't included. They often aren't brought along. And just as an example, I've been working with non-operating landowners in LSP for 3 years, and it's really taken until this year of planning for my other coworkers to, on their own, without me reminding them, to think of where to include non-operating landowners, where to highlight creative rental agreements. It's not something that is on either landowners or operators' radar, but it's also not on the educators and the technical assistants' radar either. So I'm not going to read through these, but there's a lot of potential for really amazing things to happen when these relationships, when these interactions are supported, when landowners are called to agency, when those relationships between landowners and farmers are supported and encouraged. This is a list of different landowners and also different farmers that aren't landowners who are doing really incredible things. And I just don't have time to go through all those stories. But this is a really great story. So women non-operating landowners are a really important demographic, as Denise can tell you all about, as one of the founders of Women Food Agriculture Network. WFAN began lifting up that women non-operating landowners were a really specific and important group. And this is for a lot of reasons. A lot of women have outlived partners, parents, siblings, and have become inheritors of farmland. But women have very consistently and traditionally and still currently been left out of farm management and farm operating choices, understanding management in general. And as all of us with female bodies know, agriculture is a very male-dominated field. I don't know how many times I've heard from women that they don't feel comfortable asking questions in front of a partner. They don't feel comfortable asking questions in front of a room of farmers. This is an actual quote. I don't feel visible when farmers are talking and I don't want to ask them questions. So this is why it's really important to make space for women only. In Land Stewardship Project, we engage landowners of all genders, but we also always try and deliberately make a space for women because of what we learned doing through Women Caring for the Land listening circles with WeFan that Caroline led, especially about 5 years ago. So there are complicated power dynamics between landowners and renters, and when you you throw in gender dynamics, there's more that needs to be navigated. Women often express very, very strong conservation and social values. And when they are brought together in community, not only do they share their experiences and learn that they're not isolated or alone in those experiences, that community also helps to support them acting consistently on their values. It helps them have somebody to be accountable to. It helps bringing good stories encourage them. And I want to share the story of Jeannie Hill, who is the lovely lady in this picture. She was a farmer whose husband passed away, and she inherited the renter with the land. And she lives in Bluff Country in Southeast, and she began noticing erosion issues. They had both cropland and pasture, and she was noticing erosion issues on both places. And when she went to talk to her renter about it, he dismissed her, saying, well, I'm doing exactly what your husband would have wanted me to do. And so she came to one of our workshops and she learned who her local resources were, specifically the Soil and Water Conservation District. She met that Soil and Conservation District officer at the workshop and went to meet with them later. Created a conservation plan and went with that soil and water conservation officer to speak with her landowner, because she knew that she already knew from experience that landowner wasn't going to treat her as a whole person. The renter still didn't agree. Through her relationships with the LSP, she made a connection with a beginning farmer couple who were grazing, and she changed renters, and now she's just delighted. The erosion problems are gone. Not only are the erosion problems gone, but they've been improving the land, and they've been working together to make choices that support everybody. And it's just a great story of a woman feeling when she finds a way to feel heard and connect to the correct resources, she can really act quickly and make some amazing change. Another just great reason for women only spaces occasionally to support that kind of action in community. So I just want to really underline that NOLAs are different. Non-operating landowners are different than farmers, and they need to be included and invited as much as possible. And so when you're planning an event, when you're wanting to talk to people, thinking about how to include them means thinking about how to address them and help them feel included, because they hold a lot of power on the landscape. They don't always recognize themselves as someone who needs to be actively engaged in this, have strong conservation and social values, and all these other things that I've said. I just like to collect it all in one slide to kind of underline why it's such an important group that we need to be talking with and thinking about. So how do we move non-operating landowners to action? First of all, beyond just identifying them as an important person who needs to be engaged in land management, we start with identifying values, and that their personal values that connect to their control on the land. A lot of non-operating landowners will express strong stewardship value and not realize that they could be proactively working on that on their land because they've thought of that just as a financial transaction. So really turning that switch on is a big deal. The next is building confidence and understanding. We tell people to visit their land. We tell people to self-educate. And we have a really great tool in our conservation lease toolkit, which is, there's a link there. I'll share a link in the chat after my presentation. It's where we collect a lot of information. And when I'm speaking with landowners, I tell them if you can only focus on one thing to educate yourself around, focus on soil health, because that makes everything else make more sense. Even if you don't understand the particulars, it really is sort of the baseline of understanding to help everything else make more sense. Places to build this support and education, of course, is Land Stewardship Project. We have dedicated staff to supporting non-operating landowners, but even more important are our local soil and water conservation districts. They are the local people who know the programs, know what's happening locally, know which farmers are doing something that's interesting, know the prices of land and land rental, know who to help connect people locally, even for getting equipment or understanding the general landscape of what's hard and what's supported in the area. Along with that are the National Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, are often in SWC offices, but also neighbors and family. I can't tell you how many landowners that I've encouraged to ask their neighbor about what they're doing, or ask a friend who farms to explain something to them to help them feel more ready to engage with their renter. There are some university extension services, and I really want to lift up Sustainable Farming Association as a place to learn a lot about sustainable practices and what's possible. Women Food and Agriculture Network and their women's listening circles. Climate Land Leaders is really set up for non-operating landowners who want to really work on soil building and carbon sequestration. Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, lots of places to get some help for local landowners. Sorry, changing slides. So I wanted to show you just a few of the resources that you can find on our conservation lease toolkit. I'm tripping over myself a little bit, I'm sorry. And this is one of the most popular ones. This is the primer, we call it the farming primer. Why do Minnesota farmers do what they do? It really applies to the whole upper Midwest. And when you inherit land and your biggest exposure to farming are stories of your grandpa and a couple of Monsanto commercials, you're not going to understand what's happening, and you're not going to know how to ask for change. And so we have this really simple primer that just explains some of the basics of the systems that we see in agriculture today. So tillage, crop rotation, what cover crops are and how they work, chemical sprays, what they are, and also how they work, and then livestock on the land. And it just really has helped a lot of people, men and women, orient to some of the basic language and the basic concepts of how conventional agricultural systems work right now. We also have a list of acronyms. Anybody who's ever been in agriculture knows that it is a minefield of acronyms. This is just a partial bit of a page that's actually 4 or 5 pages long, but I've seen more than just non-operating landowners show up with these at meetings. It's a helpful list. Like I said before, I always people to, if they're going to focus, only have limited energy or time to self-educate, I tell them to focus on the soil health. To that end, LSP has a really nice soil health pocket guide that I can send people printed copies of, so they have, and it's agriculturally focused, but it's about soil building and climate change It also comes in digital formats. So once again, clearly identifying those needs and goals. This is, I can't state this enough, like getting people to think about what their goals are, writing it down and sharing it with their landowner. There's a couple of resources for that. There's a U of M cash rent worksheet, which kind of helps figure out the economics. There's LSP goal setting worksheets. And we always encourage people to include partners, siblings, children, neighbors, anyone who's really connected to the management of that land, either financially or even just emotionally and in the history. Here's a goal setting for your land is a worksheet we have. But really, the hardest part, and I think the most important thing that we do in our workshops and in the circles that we've done is getting non-operating landowners ready to talk with farmers, because that is the scariest part for everybody, especially in our culture of not necessarily talking with people. So we help people prepare and go through the basics of what a good preparation is. We remind people to ask the renter what their goals and their needs for that land is, because a lot of times landowners were charged in with a lot of ideas and demands and want to tell them all their goals, and they forget to listen. And so this is an important thing to practice. Discuss changes. You need to understand what the goals are and then work with the farmer to get to those goals. It's not going to happen overnight. Anybody knows a sort of major system change takes a while. And we have resources for that too. We have a few different formats of owner-renter discussion tips. Oops, my computer's not. We encourage people to get a written lease. You would not believe how many leases are handshakes. They're a year long and they're a handshake and they're a check in the mail. And it really helps to get things written down. It provides safety for both parties. It also allows a lot more clarity on how to work on building soil, on building the health of that land. This is a resource created by Caroline and in 2016, and it's a really great place for people without leases to get some language and some ideas for what kind of pieces to put in their lease. We also have several example leases on our conservation toolkit. There's also, LSP does not have a monopoly on great resources. The Greenlands Blue Waters Midwest Perennial Forage Working Group, especially if you're working on grazing land, has a great suite of resources for landowners and people who are renting pasture as well. Practical Farmers of Iowa is doing a lot of work with non-operating landowners and have great resources if you're in Iowa. And on our toolkit, there's a lot of other resources too. So I didn't watch the timer. I hope I haven't gone horribly over. That is my 8 million miles an hour.
Oh, fabulous. Oh, Robin, that was really, really fabulous. And I think that's a good lead in for Denise. And I think Caroline wants to say a few words about it too.
Oh, no, I just want to say, Robin, you did great. You must have been watching a timer because I was, and you did swell. All right, so we have good time for Denise. And then again, everybody, if you want to put your questions or comments into the chat box, I'll try my best to facilitate them after Denise has had her say, and then we'll get going on questions and comments. All right.
Okay, well, thank you, Caroline and Christine, for asking me to do this tonight. And Robin, that was excellent. There's so much work to do, and this is such a good, for non-operator landowners. It's just excellent. And so I thought I'd give a little history about how we kind of got to where we are in that in women food, with women food and agriculture. And it was sort of this this 20 years ago, we were working on case studies of women farmers in the United States, and we couldn't find anything. The rural sociologists, nobody could find anything about women farmers in the United States, and we did a lot of research on this. And but we did come across a study in 1993 from the Economic Research Service that said women own nearly 50% of the land in most areas, and in Iowa. And so I was mulling that over in my head, and I was sitting in church one Sunday in the balcony, and I saw these blue-haired ladies down on the lower floor, a lot of them widows, and it made me wonder how they make decisions about their land and where they get their information. So I teamed up with some Iowa State folks, rural sociologists, and some others, and we started in my county here in Cass County, Iowa. We started. We put together an advisory group, and of course, that advisory group included aunts and mother-in-laws and people that you know the best, that you know you're going to have a good team, to work with, that will help you move this forward. And so we put out a survey. We figured out who the women were in the county, and it was and we got really good return. We got like a 40% return on our survey. And we started having meetings in Cass County, and we asked women. We had these learning circles. It was all about learning from each other, and we asked women about their land, and we put this out there. We gave out paper and markers and said, "What is your dream about your farm?" And women were sort of taken aback. They didn't know how to answer that because no one had ever asked them. And so it was a little awkward to get started, but once we got started, we just really, the snowball rolled, and the women shared their stories about becoming a widow, and how the people who wanted to rent her land, they unfortunately, more than once we heard, and many times we heard, that before their husband was even in the ground, the vultures were at the door, and that everybody wanted to take care of these women, or they wanted to rent their land, or they'd scoop out their snow in the wintertime if they would rent the land to them, and things like that. So, and there were some neighboring farmers that would come to us and say they were pretty concerned about, genuinely concerned, that a landowner, a female landowner, was being taken advantage of. And there's not a lot we could do about it, but just build awareness and things. So we did these meetings all over Iowa, and then began to see that women really wanted to have natural resource and conservation. Everything that Robin said is just so, just right on. And that bringing these women together, and people got upset that we would not allow the male gender to be there. They said, well, but women, as Robin said, women were intimidated by the men. They didn't want to ask dumb questions. And some women would go to the meetings that Extension would put on, and would be the only female or one of a couple of females, and they felt really like they felt the rumors would start that they were out looking for a husband, and they felt really shy about trying to find the information that. And then the other thing is they'd walk into the NRCS and ask questions, and there were a lot of eye rolls. It's just like, well, this isn't a landowner. This is a landowner. She doesn't know much about the farm. We'll work with the renter. And a lot of times they weren't in the same as the woman who you showed as an example, Robin, that wanted to saw that erosion, knew she didn't want that, and got other renters. And that also is a big thing, because if women knew things were going on their land, that they knew their husbands wouldn't quite like, that they were intimidated they weren't empowered to say to that rentor, I want to, stop the lease and get it and find another renter, because they felt like they wouldn't find anybody to rent the land, not understanding that there was a list probably 25 people long that would just grab that land up in a minute. So, and then not understanding that they could put in the leases what they wanted, that they were the landowners. They are the landowners. So if they want a waterway, if they want a buffer strip, if they want things, that they can put those in the leases, and they can find the renter who will go along with her in doing the things that she wishes as a conservationist. So we found out just very consistently that women wanted natural resource conservation measures on their land, and they wanted families on the land. And I think, again, referring to Robin's widow there, it sounds like she got a family on the land, and they're grazing, and there's so much room for beginning farmers, and that land is very inaccessible price wise and things. So to have the ability to be able to help start a beginning farmer is an excellent way that that they can help the future generations in that. And I know there's a person on here, Mary Ellen Miller, that is has land, and she's working with SILT, the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust, to put beginning farmers on the land and to have easements to grow food. Not so much conservation easements, but easements to grow food. And Mary Ellen is also a soil and water conservation commissioner. And we've been encouraging women to step up to become a soil commissioner in their counties. And it's fairly easy process, as many of you may know. It's, some counties are really lacking, from what I see in Iowa, that they don't have enough commissioners, that the people just kind of shy away from from committing to anything. Now, I was talking to a woman yesterday in New Mexico, and she said there was competition. There were 5 people running for soil commissioner in where she's from. So I see, I'm an assistant soil commissioner, and I see every time the election comes around that these guys kind of look at each other and they say, well, I guess I'll run again. And they've been on for 25 or 30 years. And, we need to have new people rotate in and out of there. And it's a very critical job, in that we're just, dispensing federal dollars that are coming to our counties and deciding what's going on in our counties. And, and that's not just about terraces. We got a new district NRCS guy in our office, and it was really refreshing to hear him say, we were doing our 5-year conservation plan, and he says, and we don't need to talk about terraces. So, and in fact, we can talk about people growing food. It doesn't have to be the same old that everybody relies on. So, I think it's important for us to think of those things, and to really, and I'll go back a little bit. The one place, and I found out this as I was beginning to farm with my husband a mere 45 years ago, that people would go to, guys would show up at the elevator, the bar, or the restaurant, and they'd talk about, well, what's your rent? What's the price of corn? What are you going to do? All of that sort of thing. And women didn't have that place to learn about what was going on in the farming world. They go to church or PTA or, women's clubs, and you talk about family and, community there. So there is not much opportunity for women to learn about, their responsibility of the land. And then they really look at it as we found out over the years, women really look at a very strong responsibility towards the land. I remember one woman saying at a meeting once that she woke up in the middle of the night, and her renter was going up into, going, she looked out the window and he had his headlights on or whatever. It was, it was one of those times you had to be out at night. And he was going up and down the hill that used to be a pasture and plowing it up. And she was just sick because she knew that her husband would not have agreed to that. And so, but again, she was kind of in this place of, how do I take care of this? I don't have anybody. I can't just go up and tell him, that I don't want him to do that. And so that it was really important that these learning circles began and started to give women that opportunity. And I have to say, there were some women that would just go and say, this is what I want, this is what I need, and they just go for it. There are many empowered women out there, and they know what they want, and they'll get it. But our socialization, our generation, the generation of women that own land are not taught that exactly. You don't, you just you take this secondary position about and kind of stay in the background, and it's still that. I mean, male agriculture is a male dominated field, and I've been a farmer for 45 years. And when Larry and I, my husband and I, are someplace together, people will say, well, how's the farm going? They'll look at him, and he goes, I'm not the farmer, she is. So it's one of those things that we just, those images that we see on television and the images that we see are changing a little bit, but there are a lot of female farmers out there now. So I think with that, I kind of gave you the background. Someone actually told me that there's still not a lot of information in our resources about female farmers. There's stories written and things, but there's not a lot of data. And in fact, it wasn't until just within the last 10 years, maybe it's longer than that now, that women have been counted in the census as a partner, or women and other partners. That usually it was one farm, one person, and usually it was a male person. And when I started farming with my husband, I had to get a power of attorney to go in and sign things, agreements that we were doing. So even though we were partners and we were signing everything and that together, I had to have that power of attorney. So things have changed, but we really need to continue to move down the path as Robin laid out so eloquently. And then, with Practical Farmers of Iowa, with Women Food and Agriculture Network, with all the resources that we have available now to be able to do that. We just need to be a little more sensitive when we are with people about looking at what their needs are, and maybe assisting them in finding the resources that they need. So that's pretty much for me, and we can have a discussion and have some questions answered. I haven't been looking at the chat box because it's really distracting. So
Wow, that's fantastic, Denise. We're so lucky to have pioneers in the heartland, including Robin and Caroline and so forth. And so I'm just so grateful that there's people like you. It makes it a better place to be, knowing that there's people that are fighting for healthy landscapes and healthy food and agriculture. And so, Caroline, I didn't see any questions, but I know you're checking out the chat box too. Does anybody have any questions? If you could put it in the chat box, that would be great.
There is a question from Mel, which very much goes with a question that I had written also. It has to do with who typically bears the cost of soil improvement on a piece of land. Is it the renter or the landowner, or is it shared? And similarly, I wanted to have either Robin and or Denise address this idea of sharing the risk. Robin, you mentioned the idea of sharing the risk, or creating an incentive instead of a requirement between a landowner and a renter. So Robin, maybe you could start with that since you had addressed it a little bit, and then Denise, please do add in the question of who does share that risk and how, and some other examples of sharing the risk between landowners and renters.
At the risk of being a broken record, it all comes down, it has to start in understanding what the needs and goals are, both for the farmer and the landowner. So a landowner having a really clear understanding of what their goals are and how that relates to their financial needs. And understanding that can make, that can make very little or a lot of room for sharing the risk. So if someone doesn't have any wiggle room on what they can bring in for what they can do for that land rent, they're dependent economically on that land rent. What they can do is lean towards the side of long-term leases that guarantee the farmer access to those improvements that he's working on the land. Look at me, I'm using male pronouns. See, we're trained to do that, and I have ranted against that. The farmer, the farmer can see the benefits of what they've done over the years with a long-term lease. If there is a lot of room, if there's room for that landowner to share the risk or incentivize the soil building, there's a million ways to do that. So there's one landowner that does crop share. That he receives a certain percentage of the crop, and so what that landowner does, as Gary Erickson in the slide earlier, what that landowner does is he flies on cover crops on all his rented land with that farmer at his own expense, and he has seen increased yields over the years, and that has incentivized that specific farmer to continue with cover crops on other acres. The Land Stewardship Project owns a piece of land that we haven't been able to transition to a beginning farmer, and we give a percentage off the bottom line of their rent for every practice that they use. So if they switch to no-till, if they use a cover crop, if they have a more diverse crop rotation than just soy, corn, and beans, that means a different kind of reduction. A third way is Mark Erickson developed a strategy with his landowner where the landowner paid for all of the infrastructure for grazing on the upfront, and Mark had a 10% increase on his rent over a certain amount of years till they got to a point where they split that cost. It just creative within the financial abilities of each party, and being really communicative of that makes for a lot of ways to either share that risk or ensure that the farmer enjoys the benefit of that investment.
Great, Robin. Denise, do you want to add something to that while we stay on the topic? And then I have a couple of other questions from the chat box. Denise?
Yeah. No, I think Robin has covered it very well. And I have to say, I'm like on the downside of doing all this stuff. So I'm not as active and am not up on all of these issues as LSP and people at WFA and PFI are. But I'm sort of the historical record now, and I keep up on things, and that. But one things I would emphasize, though, I think that's really important, is that these innovative ways of doing things. We have a new administration now that's going to be putting, it sounds like, a lot of money in conservation, and these are the places where it's going to be really to our advantage to have these kind of relationships and openness about the kind of leases and the kind of relationships we have between renters and farmers. So I think it's the groundwork is being very well laid.
Great. So Denise and Robin, can we stay a little bit on the topic of renter landowner relationships? Let's see. Anne mentions that they have a renter who doesn't sound too interested in doing cover crops, and he or she, whoever is the renter, has done a few acres, but they Anne and her family would like to do a lot more acres. Do either of you have some suggestions? Before I open my mouth, you are the guest, but what would you suggest to Anne and everyone else listening on how to work with a recalcitrant renter?
You go, Denise.
Oh, I was just gonna say the same thing to you, Robin. You know, it's an interesting, dynamic, and in the owners, in the siblings, who it seems like there's a group of people, in the family that want to do this. So in my opinion, it would be that is where the lease is so important, that this is what, this is where we put in, this land belongs to us. This is what we want to do. And perhaps even the family would be, willing to invest some of the seed money in for the cover crops and that, so that the renter doesn't have to feel so overburdened by doing something new and different. And, a lot of us it's hard for us to make changes. And so however that could be worked out with the family and the renter, I think is, would benefit both of them.
One of the
Robin,
things
do you want to add?
Yes, I do. One of the things that I like to emphasize is that we don't want to throw the farmer under the bus. So anytime that we can bring the farmer along, we want to. And that has there's a lot of reasons for that. First of all, we just understand that it's a tough job, no matter what, no matter how you're farming, it's a tough job. But also there is a lot of potential for affecting other acres if you can bring that farmer along. That is why that's where we focus. So I always, just what Denise said, like I want landowners to start there first. But that doesn't always work. There are definitely farmers who, either because of what's in their head or where their equipment's at or how stretched they are, they can't change. And that's when you reach out to someone like a local. I don't know how SWCDs work in Iowa, but if they have soil and water conservation districts, or you reach out to PFI, who has a network of conservation-minded farmers, and they might have an idea of how competitive rent is in the area where you're at, because if that also affects your choice. If your land is in an area where there isn't a lot of hunger for rented land, then you might need to work harder with that landowner. If it's a landowner's market and there's a lot of competition, then PFI can help you maybe connect with someone that would be more responsive to what you want on that land. And that relationship that you're talking about, that's mentioned, that Meg is mentioning in the chat, that's a real thing too. Like those relationships are to be honored. That's part of how we exist in this world. And there's a lot of ways that we can support figuring out how to talk through those things.
Robin, can you stay with that question from Meg? Meg asks about when a renter needs to know about a change in how much acreage is available to that person for the following farm year. So in Meg's case, it sounds like she and her family want to remove 40 acres from the rented land. When do you recommend for landowners to let their tenants know that there's going to be a change in available acreage? Like literally what month or what time of year?
As soon as you know. As soon as you know, it's good to let that renter know, because it might lead to some conversation that actually makes you find that you can keep renting with them, that they can do something. It might not, but then it gives them a chance to adapt for the next year. So as soon as you can.
All right. Could both of you or either of you address a question from Carol, who is interested in far away, like absentee landowners, people who live outside of Iowa or Minnesota or Wisconsin or, you know, our neck of the woods, absentee owners, how do you work with them? What do you suggest?
Oh, a lot of that is really supporting them on understanding what practices look like in the state, understanding what the local resources are and how to interact with them, kind of coaching them, or doing a joint call to an SWC. I've done that because of how fantastic phones are now. We can all do conference calling from our phone. You know, I've called soil and water conservation districts with a distance operator just to help them navigate where to start and what questions to ask, and help translate a little between the two parties sometimes. A lot of coaching on how to interact with that farmer. And one hole that I see, and that was even asked, I think it was Dave Zentner that asked earlier in the conversation, is I don't have a list of good farm managers, because that is a service that is out there that would be great to have really strong conservation minded land, a list of really strong conservation minded land managers. And I don't have that. That's missing. But you know, what I personally can provide is, you know, knowing what resources are close. Like if you have land in Iowa, I would put you directly in contact with PFI. If you have land in Minnesota, I would connect you to the resources I would know close to that land, including some of our members. I've done that several times. Just connecting people as best I can. I am only one human being, but I try really hard.
Well, and I would, you know, that was going back to Dave's question about land managers, and there is a whole, you know, that's a whole nother piece that belongs in here. And I know many times we've complained in a conversation or whatever with different folks that, you know, the bottom line for a land manager is for the profit, for the, you know, the owner of the land, and profit is brought about by a pretty traditional way. So all of these new innovative, well, they're not that new, they've been around for years. We're reintroducing these things, and finding out with research that they're very successful. So profit can be gained in another way than using, you know, amounts of inputs for the land. And so I think I would agree with Robin, and it's an area of need to be working in that, and perhaps what needs to be done, and I you know, is to you know, contact the Association of Land Managers, or somehow get into their conference, you know, schedule, and have some of these conversations taking place in there. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of good people who'd be really open to this, or this information.
I wanna butt in here for just a moment before we run out of time, and ask Denise if you could address whether the Women Food and Ag Network is holding their learning circle still, and then who people in Iowa might contact around that sort of thing. And then Robin, if you would again say how people can find you, and could you, Robin, address the fact that this is not just about women landowners, that it is about all landowners? And if you could address, Robin, what you do when you have a group of men and women non-operating landowners in a workshop. And if you don't, I will tell people what you do about it, which is just brilliant.
Well, the person who's been doing the programming from Women Food and Agriculture Network has been Jean Eels, and she works as a consultant to the program, and she's been all over the United States. And actually, I was on a training with NRCS. She was training NRCS people over the winter for a certification, and I was on one of her Zooms with her group of people explaining about how to be receptive to women landowners coming into the office and seeing to their needs in that. And the other thing that Jean did, I think that was really incredible, was she's in communications. She's got a PhD in communications, and she figured out what colors of brochures, what colors to put in brochures, what was attractive to women to look at so they could understand what was going on. So, whether they were pinks or blues or purples, I don't know, but the literature that she came up with, the brochures is very readable and very soothing. I don't know is the correct word, but it's to assimilate, I guess is what I would say. Now I want to hear Robin.
Well, I'm a little nervous. I'm not exactly sure what Caroline is after, but it is important. When I say agriculture is a male-dominated landscape, it's a very patriarchal landscape. And that also is not inviting to men who don't hold power in that structure. I've had men come to me and tell me they secretly are embarrassed because they grew up in this area, but they weren't part of farming in their family, and they feel shamed to not know enough around other men in that community, so they won't show their faces at a field day. We need to be engaging everyone. Another reason is that land is power. Land is power. And if we aren't asking people to be responsible for that power, to be aware of how they're using that power, to be intentional, we can't make change. We can't make change on the landscape. We can't make change for justice. We can't change how this world works if we aren't waking people up to use their power. Caroline, what would you add?
I think that you do a fabulous job, Robin, at countering the tendency in a mixed gender room for often, not always, for women to step back and men to step forward. And I think that's just something that bears speaking about. And I suspect that perhaps Jean Eels in her training addresses that issue. It's not that all women step back and all men step forward. It's just that there's a tendency to that. And so I've seen you when you've done presentations like this, but over 4 hours instead of 1 hour. And there have been, there's no gender segregation. It's just whoever wants to come gets to come. And I've seen you balance very diplomatically, but firmly, so that there is space for everyone to speak. And that's part of what we're talking about here.
And I name that gendered power dynamic in those mixed spaces, because we're not going to change it without men being aware of it and working on their own tendencies as well.
Yeah, and I suppose you could say that balance or imbalance plays a role when you have landowners and tenants working together too, which we've spent the hour listening about a little bit too.
Yeah.
We are just at 8 o'clock. Are there any other burning questions or comments or observations that anyone wants to make out loud, not just through the chat box?
Sure, we can open it up now. There's still about 21 people on, and it's totally up to everybody. Often we stay on for a little while longer. So if anybody has any comments, and I see we have some really fun people that showed up. We have Seth Watkins that popped in. I don't know if he's got us on, he's listening, and I don't know where he is, but anyway, he popped on. And we've got David Zentner and a few other men on. So we have Mike Carberry, who's very active in conservation in Iowa, and he's on. So we do have some people that care about our conversation, which is fun to see.
Don't be name checking me there. Well, it's great to be on. It was a great conversation and just enjoying listening to the women take the microphone. I've said enough over the last few years.
I don't know if you all saw Mary Ellen's comment up earlier, but she said she's the first Wayne County female soil and water conservation commissioner, serving her 4th year. And 2 of her fellow people just received their 50-year pins for service, and the 3rd commissioner is 92 years old. Yep, I think it's time for some changes there. So we're going to have to encourage a few women in Wayne County to be joining Mary Ellen, I think.
Christine, do you want to just say how the recording will be put out to everybody?
Yes, absolutely. Zoom has this great service that they provide. They save it to the cloud, and then I will edit it and just take out our few minutes of our tests right at first, and be saving it to YouTube, and then I will send it out. And I did mention that in the chat box too, is we will, I'll send it out to all the people that registered, so everybody will have a link. And we also share it on, through social media, through the website, and also through Facebook. So it will be shared. And we have some other presentations that we've had during this winter. Some great voices, and that's our whole purpose, is to amplify the voices and share that amongst hopefully some other people that normally wouldn't be listening. So we hope to get a few other people other than just the same people at the same crowds. I mean, when you know everybody, so it's fun to try to continue to amplify voices in other spaces where we can share this information, because that's our whole goal. And in 2019, we had a non-operating landowner meeting here in Des Moines at the Botanical Gardens for the UMRI. And we had it open for both males and females. We had a few people that were there to learn, but it was mainly kind of a think tank of how we could reach others and what needs to be done. So we're hopefully going to be trying to connect with other organizations and people that are doing this, and again, amplify the voice and share this information
And save our soil.
Exactly.
Shall we call it an evening, everybody?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Denise, for your
You're
good
welcome.
work, past
Thank
and
you.
present and future. And
Absolutely.
Thanks to all. Everyone brings a value, part of our trip through life, and this has been a rich exchange. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's our executive director, David Zentner from Minnesota, who is one of our conservation heroes.
And
all
I
right.
have a good friend on here, Sarah Vogel, that we went through a lot of stuff through the farm crisis together, who's a lawyer in North Dakota. So I've got to give a shout out to Sarah. Thank you.
Great.
So good to see you.
Welcome, Sarah. All right.
Thank you, everybody, for staying with us. I know the COVID masks are coming off and the light is still out there. And I think we're going to have, it's not as fun being on Zoom as it was during the winter when there wasn't any, we had a captive audience.
So true. All right. Good night, everybody. Good
Yeah,
night.
good night. Thank you, everybody. Gratitude.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a beautiful evening, everybody.